Silence doesn't actually exist. It's just a mask for the sounds we are too afraid to notice, a thin veneer over the constant hum of existence, or perhaps the subtle thrum of something else entirely. My name is Elias Thorne, and I am a scholar of the overlooked. My days are spent sifting through dusty archives, dissecting the psychological underpinnings of urban legends, and writing a dissertation on the phenomenology of auditory hallucinations in solitary confinement. The irony of my current situation is not lost on me. I moved into this apartment, a narrow pre-war studio perched on the 5th floor of a venerable brick building, precisely 6 months ago. The lure was its character, the kind that comes with creaking floorboards, a radiator that sings operatically in the dead of winter, and walls that whisper tales of forgotten tenants. It was meant to be my sanctuary, a quiet haven where the cacophony of city life would fade into a manageable background hum, allowing me to finally complete my magnum opus. Instead, it has become a crucible. The apartment itself is a testament to faded elegance, high ceilings, crown molding, and a fireplace that hasn't seen a flame in 50 years. My bed, a simple, sturdy frame, sits directly opposite the walk-in closet. Its door, made of heavy dark oak, has never quite managed to latch properly. It remains perpetually ajar, a gap of precisely 2 inches, a dark sliver that seemed until recently utterly innocuous. It was merely a design flaw, a charming imperfection in an otherwise perfectly adequate dwelling. I kept it filled with my modest wardrobe, tweed jackets, a collection of worn literary t-shirts, and the usual array of urban survival gear. The air inside always smelled faintly of cedar and the forgotten scents of old paperbacks I sometimes stored there. My sleep, normally a fragile, easily disturbed affair, had initially settled into a predictable rhythm here. The city outside, a symphony of distant sirens and late-night revelers, eventually became white noise. I learned to sleep through the neighbors' dog barking and the early morning rumble of sanitation trucks. I was a light sleeper, yes, but a seasoned light sleeper. This distinction would prove vital. The first instance wasn't a bang, a crash, or even a sudden snap. It was far more insidious. It was a rhythm. Phew. The sound began precisely at 3:39 a.m., according to the glowing red digits of my bedside clock. My eyes snapped open, not in alarm, but in a strange, almost academic curiosity. It was a wet, ragged intake and exhalation, like someone struggling for air after a long run, or perhaps after holding their breath for too long. My own breath, usually shallow and even in sleep, now hitched in my throat, a dry, sharp lump of ice. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't a phantom echo of something I'd heard earlier in the day. The sound was distinct, palpable, and undeniably present, and it was coming from the darkness beyond the 2-inch gap of the oak closet door. My mind, trained in rationalization, immediately began its frantic dance. It's the old pipes settling with the change in temperature. It's the radiator hissing air. It's a stray cat somehow squeezed into the ventilation shaft. It's a trick of the acoustics, say your own heartbeat echoing in your ears. But the sound was too deliberate, too organic. It was a living, breathing sound, and then a subtle, almost imperceptible detail solidified my dread. A soft, metallic clink, the unmistakable sound of a coat hanger gently swaying on the closet rod, as if disturbed by an unseen movement. I lay utterly still, a rigid effigy of fear beneath my thin duvet. Every muscle in my body was locked. My eyes, wide and unblinking, were fixed on that sliver of darkness, willing it to reveal nothing, to offer a rational explanation. The breathing continued, a steady, measured cadence that seemed to fill the room, consuming the silence that had once been my solace. It was a heavy sound, too heavy for a small animal, too deliberate for an inanimate object. It sounded human, or at least something that breathed like a human. The terror was cold, precise. I reached for my phone, my fingers fumbling, slick with a sudden sheen of sweat. The cool metal of the device felt alien in my grasp. The soft blue glow of the screen, when it finally flickered to life, seemed like a beacon in the oppressive gloom, yet also terribly vulnerable. I considered calling the police, but the thought evaporated as quickly as it formed. What would I say? "Hello, officer. I think someone is breathing in my closet at 3:39 a.m.? They'd think I was either a prank caller or suffering from a vivid nightmare. And what if I called them, and the breathing simply stopped the moment I uttered a word?" The sheer absurdity of the situation wrestled with the primal fear gripping me. I decided, against every fiber of my rational being, to investigate, or at least to gather more data. My academic instincts, twisted by terror, urged me to observe. "Who's there?" I whispered, my voice a pathetic, reedy croak that sounded alien even to my own ears. It was less a challenge and more a desperate plea for an explanation. The breathing stopped, instantly. The sudden, absolute silence that followed was far worse than the noise. It was a vacuum, a pressurized void that made my eardrums throb, amplifying the frantic thump of my own heart. The air in the room felt thick, heavy, as if the oxygen itself had been sucked away. I could hear the blood rushing in my ears, a frantic river against the backdrop of absolute quiet. And then, slowly, agonizingly, the closet door began to open further. Not pushed from the outside, but pulled from the inside. A soft, deliberate scrape of wood against wood, accompanied by a faint, almost imperceptible thump as something shifted within. The gap widened slowly, steadily, until it was perhaps 4 inches, revealing a deeper, more profound blackness within. I couldn't discern a shape, a form, only the utter absence of light. A void that seemed to swallow the faint glow from my phone. A new sensation began to prickle at my skin. A subtle, almost imperceptible shift in the air pressure within the room. It was as if something large had moved, displacing the stagnant air, creating a faint, localized draft that carried with it a faint, stale odor. Not the cedar scent I was accustomed to, but something earthy, something like damp soil and old, forgotten linen. I felt a profound sense of violation, of being watched, studied, perhaps even inhaled. The academic detachment I usually maintained shattered, replaced by a raw, instinctual fear that pulsed through my veins. This wasn't a hallucination. This was real, and it was in my closet. Panic, cold and sharp, finally broke through my paralysis. I sprang from the bed, a sudden burst of adrenaline flooding my system. My hand fumbled for the light switch beside the bedroom door, my fingers scrabbling against the cool plastic. The overhead bulb flickered to life with an angry hum, momentarily stinging my eyes with its harsh, yellow light. The sudden illumination seemed to scour the room, pushing back the encroaching shadows. I grabbed the heaviest object within reach, a weighty leather-bound edition of my own incomplete research on sensory deprivation, and clutched it like a weapon. My heart hammered against my ribs. A frantic drumbeat. "Get out!" I screamed, the word a raw, guttural sound that tore from my throat. My voice, though trembling, held a desperate edge. I lunged towards the closet, flinging the heavy oak door wide with a force that sent it crashing against the wall. My breath hitched. The closet was empty. My coats hung in neat, silent rows, their fabric stirring gently from the displaced air. My shoes were lined up on the rack, undisturbed. The floor was clear, the walls bare. There was no secret crawl space, no hidden trapdoor, no dark recess where something could be lurking. Just the faint, familiar smell of cedar and old fabric, now overlaid with the lingering scent of my own fear. I stood there, gasping, the heavy book still clutched in my hand, my body shaking uncontrollably. My mind, reeling from the sudden adrenaline dump, she tried to reconcile the undeniable sounds with the undeniable emptiness. Was I truly losing my mind? Had the pressure of my dissertation finally cracked my sanity? I slid to the floor, leaning against the door frame, a shaky, breathless laugh escaping my lips. It was a laugh of relief, of disbelief, of utter exhaustion. I checked the time again. 3:45 a.m. 6 minutes. 6 minutes of terror, entirely conjured by my own overactive imagination. I chastised myself mentally. "Elias, you're a psychologist, for crying out loud. You know how the mind plays tricks in the dark. To fully convince myself, to dispel the last lingering tendrils of paranoia, I decided to do a thorough check. I'd move everything, prove the floor was solid, the walls impenetrable. I began with the laundry bag, a heavy canvas sack filled with a week's worth of clothes, usually tucked into the far corner of the closet. As I dragged it aside, the rough fabric scraping against the wooden floor, I saw it. Taped to the back wall of the closet, at eye level, was a Polaroid photo. It was a picture of me, taken from inside this very closet, sleeping soundly in my bed. The timestamp, a small, faded orange digital imprint in the corner, read 3:39 a.m., yesterday. The world tilted, the air went thin. The mundane familiarity of my apartment warped into something alien and terrifying. Someone hadn't just been in there tonight. They had been living in the rhythm of my life, a silent, unseen observer, a constant, chilling presence that had seeped into the very fabric of my existence. My gaze snapped back to the photo, my eyes scrutinizing every detail. It was undeniably me, my profile peaceful in sleep, the faint light from the street casting long shadows across my room. But then I noticed another detail, a horrifying detail that made my blood run cold. In the reflection of the antique mirror behind my bed in the picture, a sliver of the photographer's reflection was visible. It wasn't a human hand. It was pale, impossibly elongated, with too many visible joints, knuckles that seemed to bend at unnatural angles, and fingers that looked more like bony talons. Then I noticed the ceiling. My building, like most pre-war structures, had no attic access from individual apartments. Yet, directly above the closet rod, a rectangular ventilation grate, usually flush with the plaster, was now visibly unscrewed, hanging precariously by a single rusty thread of metal. It was tilted, a dark mouth leading into an unseen labyrinth above. The breathing hadn't been coming from behind the clothes, from the floor, or even from the depths of the closet itself. It had been coming from above them, from the narrow, dusty, forgotten passages of the ventilation system, a hidden network connecting every apartment, every private moment, to an unseen observer. It explained the shifting coat hanger, the faint metallic clink, the sense of air displacement. Whatever it was, it had been descending through the ducts, settling into the upper reaches of my closet, watching, waiting. And then at 3:39 a.m., it had begun to breathe. My mind raced, connecting the chilling dots, the faint, earthy smell, the unnatural stillness after I whispered. The closet door opening from the inside. It wasn't a physical breach through the main door, but an invasion through the very infrastructure of my home. It had been using the ventilation system as its personal highway, its unseen sanctuary, always returning to that small, familiar space above my closet. My gaze drifted back to the photo. Yesterday. This wasn't a one-time occurrence. This was a pattern, a ritual. How many other photos were there? How many other yesterdays had it spent watching me? The thought was a suffocating blanket. A tiny, almost imperceptible drip landed on my bare shoulder. It was cold, viscous, and seemed to burn through my skin. I didn't look up immediately. I couldn't. My eyes were still fixed on the horror of the Polaroid, but then, drawn by an irresistible dread, I slowly raised my head. A shadow, long and impossibly thin, was stretching across the ceiling from the vent opening. It wasn't the shadow of a human limb. It was something spindly, elongated, with multiple joints that seemed to articulate in unnatural ways. It was descending. My breath caught in my throat. I watched, paralyzed, as the shadow solidified, resolving into a form that defied all logic and biology. It was something thin, impossibly tall, and draped in what looked like shredded gray silk, clinging to its skeletal frame. It moved with a disturbing fluid grace, like an enormous, ancient insect slowly unfolding itself from a chrysalis. The air in the closet grew heavy with that same faint, earthy odor, now mingled with something else. A metallic tang, like old blood, but subtle, almost subliminal. The thing, I couldn't call it a person, dropped to the closet floor with a soft, almost soundless thud, its movements eerily deliberate. It stood nearly 7 feet tall, its spine curved in a perpetual, grotesque question mark, its limbs long and gangly. It wore my spare trench coat, the fabric straining against its unnatural proportions, the sleeves dangling far too long. The empty hood of the coat was pulled up, obscuring whatever passed for its head. It didn't have a face, just a tight, almost featureless mask of pale, stretched skin where a face should be, punctuated by a thin, dark slit where a mouth might have been. But there were no eyes, no nose, no discernible features. It was a blank canvas of dread. It didn't attack, not yet. It simply leaned in, its face inches from mine, its blank gaze unnervingly fixed on me, though I knew it had no eyes. The raw terror I felt was so potent it tasted metallic on my tongue. And then, it mimicked the sound I had heard all night. Ha, phew. The sound was perfect, a chilling echo of the ragged breathing, but now imbued with a grotesque intimacy. And then a voice, not its own, but a perfect distorted recording of my own voice, whispered from that thin slit in its featureless face. It was my voice, but warped, slowed, imbued with an unholy glee. "You have such a calming rhythm," it hissed, the words drawn out, each syllable a caress of terror. "Such a beautiful song. I have been listening for so long." The thing extended one of its long, bony fingers, tipped with a darkened, unnatural nail, and slowly, gently, traced the outline of my jaw. The touch was cold, dry, like ancient parchment. My mind screamed, but my body remained frozen, unable to move, unable to even blink. The realization that this creature had been recording me, perhaps even my every movement and sound for months, settled over me like a shroud. I found a sliver of desperate strength, a primal spark of survival. With a choked cry, I thrashed, pushing away from the creature, scrambling backward. My hand struck the bedroom door, grasping frantically for the handle. I twisted. It wouldn't turn. It was locked. From the outside, the creature took a slow, deliberate step towards me, its head tilted as if savoring my terror. Its blank face seemed to ripple, the skin tightening, pulling into something akin to a smile. The ventilation grate above began to clatter, as if something else was moving in the ducts, drawn by the disturbance. I looked frantically around the room, my gaze falling on the window. It was old, heavy, but a single pane of glass separated me from the street below. With a desperate surge of adrenaline, I grabbed the heavy bedside lamp, its base solid metal, and swung it with all my might at the window pane. The glass shattered with a deafening crash, shards raining inward. The sudden noise, the rush of cold night air, seemed to startle the creature. It recoiled, its movements sudden and jerky, turning its blank face towards the broken window, as if momentarily disoriented. "Help! Someone! Please!" I screamed, my voice raw, torn, but cutting through the night. I leaned out the broken window, yelling until my lungs burned, distant shouts from below. The sudden blare of a siren growing closer. The creature seemed to sense the approaching danger. With a terrifying speed that belied its previous languid movements, it scrambled back into the ventilation shaft, a fleeting glimpse of its elongated form disappearing into the darkness of the ducts. The grate slammed shut with a sickening clang, leaving only the shattered window, the lingering stench, and the ringing echo of my own screams. The police arrived minutes later, their flashlights cutting through the gloom, their voices a sudden, jarring intrusion of reality. They found the broken window, the ransacked closet, and me, a shivering wreck on the floor. They searched the entire building's ductwork, apartment by apartment, with thermal cameras and search dogs. They found nothing. No creature, no person. Only a crude nest woven from my stolen clothes, secreted away in a forgotten corner of the main ventilation shaft, and dozens upon dozens of Polaroids scattered amidst the fabric, each one a chilling snapshot of my private life, dating back to the day I moved in. I moved out that same night, refusing to spend another moment in that apartment. I stayed at a brightly lit hotel on the other side of town, the kind with thick carpets and constant reassuring background noise. I felt safe. I felt alone. I felt a fragile sense of peace beginning to return. I sat on the edge of the bed, wrapped in a hotel towel, trying to calm my racing heart. I watched the clock on the bedside table. It ticked steadily, each second a small victory against the lingering terror. Then, at precisely 3:39 a.m., my phone buzzed. It wasn't a call or a text. It was an airdrop request. From unknown. A cold dread seeped into my bones, instantly erasing any sense of security. My hands trembled as I hesitantly accepted. It was a live video feed. The camera was positioned perfectly, expertly hidden under my hotel bed, looking up at the springs and the underside of the mattress. The image wavered slightly, then steadied, and then the audio began. It was a familiar sound, wet, ragged, and utterly horrifying. "Ah, phew." And then a whisper in my own voice, but laced with a chilling, triumphant intimacy. The sound seemed to emanate not from the phone, but from somewhere closer, somewhere below me, somewhere within the very room. "New room," it whispered. "Same rhythm." And just before the feed cut out, I heard it shift, the faint scrape of something moving, a slow, deliberate slither, as if settling in for another long, watchful night.